by willpower and just plain discipline?
Jesus.
And I said, maybe. I don't know what you're talking about. But anytime you have a chance to learn something, have a good day.
You're a better person than I am.
Well, God's working on me real hard about my mouth.
I have a problem with that. I have trouble with Facebook trolls. All right, let's see here. Did this one come on?
Hey there. How are you doing? See, that was me. By the joke. Really, really well. She was doing really well.
We'll give it about 2 or 3 more minutes, guys, then we'll get the show.
When you grab it, that's good. Didn't it? You feel better and you sleep better. She's, so pretty comfortable. Got a job. So she can pay her rent. So I'm just like, yeah, the sober living house. But they helped her and she got her fixed up. Right, exactly. But there is, well, there's supposed to be 6 Well, she's still texting. That was the only thing I did not like. Well, she is. Well, and see, I would have thought that she has to take it on. So I think the whole and they were
Do we have a sign-in sheet, Carol? You know. Can you grab a sign-in sheet, Trish? Brian, will you shut that door back there, brother? All right. All right, guys, we'll get the show on the road here. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Rich Jones. I'm the CEO here at Favor Greenville, and I'll talk a little bit about my story and my background as we go through. Tonight we're going to talk about, last week we talked about boundaries and sort of how do we say no and how do we kind of set limits, that kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Before we get going, though, and I do think this relates a lot to boundaries. When you think about like boundaries and how do we get people to treat us the right way and how do we try to get our loved ones to kind of stop destroying themselves and stop destroying us, I'm of the opinion it's not necessarily like what to do, it's how to do it. A lot of times when people ask us, they describe a situation and then they say, you know, what should I do about that? The most honest thing is the answer is pretty clear a lot of times. But the issue is, and I think that's how it is with raising kids in general, or relationships in general, or however you want to think about it, it's not so much that the what is a mystery. It's all these feelings and all these other things that go on to keep us from doing things that are in our best interest, right? And that's literally the human condition. That's the psychology of change. It relates to every interaction, every relationship, every circumstance that we're in. So when you talk about the stigma and you talk about reasons, or when you talk about reasons that keep us from saying no and setting boundaries where addiction is concerned, one of the top ones that come to my mind is stigma. Stigma and shame. And this idea that if I start doing something about this, or maybe I let somebody know that my kid is using, or maybe I start setting boundaries and he doesn't go out and maybe he acts out, what? People will find out. People will know what's going on. And if people know what's going on, they're going to talk about me. And because the world doesn't necessarily understand what substance use disorders are, and they certainly have a very stereotypical kind of view of what an addict is, right? And we know that to be the case. We talk about that a lot in here, and we know that there are obvious ways, there are obvious indications of that being the case. Our policies around incarceration would be an example of that. That we systematically lock up people for relatively minor drug charges. I'm not advocating that people who do violence should be put in treatment instead, but we lock people up when we could easily convert to a mandatory treatment sentence. It could easily happen, much more cost effective. So our policies don't indicate that. And then there are subtle ways and there are additional ways, but make no mistake, it sends a message to us when there are news articles and news stories and things that we hear. And it just so happens we're dealing with one of those issues right now here in the upstate. And the Greenville News reporting on this issue of this kid from Malden getting killed, getting murdered on a drug deal gone bad. And the way that they wrote this up and the way that they went about describing what was going on is incredibly, incredibly disrespectful. It's embarrassing to me that someone there or that guy talked to people and that's what came out of this. The stigma that he pushed, though, is interesting. It wasn't against the addicted person. Who was it against? Parents. It was against parents.
I didn't read the article.
I'm about to talk to you about the article. And I'm going to encourage you to, when you get a chance, this is on Facebook, and share this with people and talk to people about this and make sure that you let the Greenville News know that you appreciate them basically saying you suck as a parent if your kid has an addiction issue, okay? Because let's understand the context for this too. These families haven't even started, they haven't even grieved yet. Literally the body's not even cold and they want to jump on. And the article is entitled Tips and Advice for Parents on How to Talk to Children About Drugs After Teen Deaths, okay? You can look it up, it came out on February 3rd, all right? And there's some stuff in there that's just real basic, and no one can deny that this is good stuff when it comes to trying to raise our kids regardless of what the issue is. This isn't just for drug addiction. Communicate, discuss rules and consequences, show you care, pay attention, share family activities, give and get respect, and enforce consequences consistently. No one on the face of the earth can argue that that's not a good way to go. Right? So that was the good part of the article. So the article starts off, it describes what happens, it gets some advice from some professionals about how parents should communicate with their kids, and then the next page break has this headline on it: Weak Relationships with Parents. And a quote: "Too often we see families that are disengaged from the child's daily activities, and therefore parents can easily miss the early warning signs that a teenager may be vulnerable to the wrong peer group or unfortunately already showing signs that they have drifted into drug activity." So the way that I read that is if your kid drifted into drug activity, you suck. I mean, can you read that any other way?
Yes.
How?
Well, I think that statement is relatively true.
I think that statement is dead wrong.
But But
Now, it might be true in your experience.
I've heard it in this room where parents have said that they have ignored or not paid attention to the signs of their addict until they were already in full-blown addiction.
And I've heard 75 other people who said the opposite of that. I've talked.
I didn't know.
Yeah, well, you didn't. There's a difference between I didn't know and I ignored. Do you see that? There's a difference between I didn't know and I ignored. You guys get the difference?
Yeah.
I didn't know is kind of like this passed me by. Ignored implies I willfully made a decision to kind of turn the other way. That kind of thing. Which now, any of this could happen in any given case. Any of this could happen. But there's another side to this situation. It's actually much more common. Based on my experience working with families, based on my experience talking to people in groups like this, and it's actually that people could see that something was going on. Nobody was ignoring anything, and they were all trying to do this stuff the whole time. I don't know that I've got to tell you the truth. I've done this with thousands of people. I don't know that I've ever met the parent who said, we knew something was going on and we just walked away and went the other way. I mean, I guess it could happen. Yeah, it does happen. Of course it does. But it is not the majority of the situations. It is just not factually true to say that this stuff wasn't trying to get done. Show you care. How many of you tried to set rules and consequences? Every single person in the room tried to set rules and consequences. See, don't let them fool you. Don't allow them to tell you that this kind of stuff is okay. Because what it does is, it sends a very, very subtle message that, in my opinion, will erode at your ability to make good decisions in any given situation. Why? Because it's emotional. Because you feel like crap. And the way that this will come out is... let me ask you guys, what's the way that this issue is most likely to play itself out in the lives of parents? Guilt, and they won't say anything to anyone when they're dealing with this because they don't want this to come out, that they let it go too far. Do you follow? This does not frame addiction as a healthcare issue, and this does not say, please talk to your doctor about it. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Well, and I think we talk about it when they're maybe just drinking a little bit, or they're just smoking a little pot. But when it gets to a certain phase, you don't want to tell anybody because of the judgment and the shame, just like you talked about earlier.
And because
we don't know where to go either.
Because that type of thing, especially the first statement. What do you think about the first statement?
Disengaged? I was going through a room.
No, the top part, the headline.
Oh,
It's a judgment.
Weak relationships with parents is literally the headline.
What
So,
teenager doesn't have that?
That's not true either.
But
I think it's an insult and
it's very insulting. It's very insulting. It should make everybody in this room outraged. Outraged. It's absolutely insulting. And it falls into this kind of category of suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And if kids have problems with drugs, it's because parents are enablers. And if kids, and for that matter, you could say, like, if husbands have problems with drugs, it's because wives are codependent. It's that stereotypical, like, stuff, guys, that's not healthy. And the reason that it's not healthy is it creates that underlying guilt and shame that will keep people, not you guys are here, you're in this room. I'm not talking to you. You've already made a decision to come get information. But we know that you don't represent all the people in Greenville who need to be here. Can we agree to that?
Yes.
So there's something, and this is a free service. You know, I'm relatively enjoyable to come here. I mean, come on, it's not that bad. So what keeps people away? What keeps people away is embarrassment and shame.
Right.
And what we have to be careful of is that we don't fall into this, well, yeah, that's true. There's truth to that. Because there's really no place for that. Do you criticize when a person passes away from cancer, do we criticize anyone for not getting it done earlier, getting it screened earlier, getting a blood test done earlier? You get where I'm coming from? Is there ever anything where it was weak relationships with parents, they let this slide by? So challenge this in your mind and understand something, guys, that no matter what, no matter what you do as a parent, that, well, here are the facts. What is it? 40% of 12th graders report monthly alcohol use. Okay? That's monthly. About 80% report lifetime. You get that? They drink, guys. The idea that we have communicated and discussed rules and done all this and our kids aren't drinking, that's really, really naive. What has happened is that some of those kids have what? Because they were like me, what happened? They crossed the line into something else. They crossed the line into something else. But it's not about the rest of the world, all these kids are towing the line. They're just really, really good at putting it on. One of the most interesting things, so I'm from Pennsylvania, and I've said this to folks in Pennsylvania, I said it to my wife too. I don't know how to say this. Drug addicts here in Greenville, South Carolina are really polite. I work with like 20-year-olds back in Pennsylvania. It was my private practice. I've never had a drug addict say yes, sir, to me.
That's a southern.
But every drug addict that comes into Favor Greenville says yes, sir. Okay? I'm like, well, that's a really nice drug addict. Because it's putting on a show is what's going on, guys. It's putting on a show. And here's the good news. The good news is that the majority of people who do start messing around with things aren't necessarily going to go there. That's hopeful information. It is a brain disease. It only happens to a certain percentage of people. The bad news is, as indicated by this situation, you don't have to be addicted to have something tragic happen. And the solution is to open up pathways of communication, not just within the family, but within the school, within the community, within the healthcare setting, within the church. It's got to get away from this idea that there's a group that's doing it right and a group that's doing it wrong. Do you get that? And so you guys got to be aware of it. You know this stuff. You've heard this before. Here's how it works. This is what helps people sleep at night. Have you ever heard the phrase, that kid died and he was from a good family? Have you ever heard that? Don't you find that very odd? Isn't that a strange thing to say?
I could ask what my other kids are like.
Well, I mean, isn't it a strange thing? Isn't that a strange qualifier? So the kid died of an overdose, and that's not bad enough. We have to make sure that we let you know that he was from a good family. When people say that to me, I've started to say, I don't want to hear that. I don't care that he was from a good family. And who actually, like, is there a list of good families? Is there a keeper of good families? And I really don't know. I'm probably not on it. We're probably not on it. Me and my crew, right? Like, where is that list of good families? And if somebody can give that to me. And what that means is he was from a family that did all the right things. Very polished, certain level of success. Again, yes sir, no sir, that kind of stuff. And you get to stay in the group from a good family until you screw up. And then you get moved over to the group that the good families have to stay away from. And you really don't get moved over there until you make a pretty big mistake. You get that? Because a lot of times, but so what if you're in here? What if you're a family that's in this club and you know your kid is doing stuff? What are you trying to do? You're trying to keep it quiet. You're trying to push it down. Let's keep a lid on this. Come on. Rather than seeking help. And I'm not saying everybody needs to broadcast it from the rooftops, but seeking help, doing what you need to do from a healthcare standpoint, getting the person assessed, getting the person into care, whatever that may look like for that individual person. And so we have to make sure we're not feeding into this. And you guys are our only hope. I'll be perfectly honest with you. This is nothing that Rich Jones can solve. This is not a Favor Greenville staff solution. This is nothing that's going to be solved by any counselor anywhere. This is a community-based problem that will be solved by families. By families brave enough to actually start talking about it, start thinking about it, talk about it at church, talk about it in all the places that you're not supposed to talk about it. Take chances, because you're going to get exposed when you do that. You know, the phrase my wife always talks about is nobody brings you a casserole when they find out your kid is addicted. What happens whenever any other disease goes down? You get a casserole, right? Yes. Well, maybe not a casserole, but something.
There's a tension, and I'm pretty frank about all of this with my friends, and several of them have said, oh, maybe I should come with you. I mean, everybody's got something going on, and maybe we're not in a good family group. But if the...
Or maybe you just have expressed it and they've expressed back, right? Because that can happen too. You can blow this up if you start saying it, because you never know. You might find out everybody has something.
Well, everybody has something
Yeah.
so far. But the thing I don't know about is, I'm not big on anonymity, and I don't know that my son is either. I mean, he's pretty frank about this.
Yeah.
But I know that anonymity is a big part of this, so how can I talk about, with my support group?
It's a really good question. Especially because you're not talking about yourself, you're talking about your loved one. Her question is, what about confidentiality, anonymity? Do I have a right to share my kid's story? I think that's a fantastic question. We've had it in here before, and I think you have to talk to your son about that, or your daughter, or whatever it may be. And I would follow their lead in that regard. I would never, if they said, Mom, please keep that quiet, I would never go bring it up. You never know what they're going to say. One of the interesting things in my experience with younger kids, and when I say younger, I'm talking maybe their 20s, they don't have issues with confidentiality. They put everything on Facebook anyway.
Yeah, when my daughter put it on Facebook, I said, so are we putting this out there? And she said, yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
I said,
I had a mom say, like, did you have to be taking a picture of yourself with your graduation from Rehab certificate? We told Grandma you were at horse camp.
Yeah. We're still hoping Grandma
Right.
don't find out.
But what fires me up about it is, what fires me up about it is, first of all, I know how hard it is to be a parent. Across all avenues, right? Ranging from when they're little kids up to when they're young adults, and getting them to do the right thing, getting them to say the right thing, getting them to do their homework, getting them to do whatever. And when somebody says stuff to me like, "Well, you should just communicate better," or "You should just set," no kidding. It's kind of like the person back in the day when I was full blown in active addiction saying, "You should just not do drugs." And I was like, I never thought of that. Never thought of that before. So that's what we want to fight against, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. I'm going to go through this issue of what is substance use. We've done it in here before, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on it tonight. I want to talk about these basics, and I want you guys to ask questions, because I want you to leave here with a clear understanding of what you're dealing with and what the situation is, and how this isn't about a bad parent. Even if you've done something wrong, do you understand that? Even if you've done something wrong that you're kicking yourself for, that anybody objectively would say, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. Do you guys get this? Even if you've done that, understand that all of us have made 10 of those mistakes, 20 of those mistakes, 50 of those mistakes. So it's not like we can sit here and say that we're perfect parents and we've never done anything wrong that might have increased the risk around our kid, right? Maybe we made a bad decision around this, or maybe we made a bad decision around that. I've said all along, without question, one of the things that contributed to what my daughter went through was me pulling her out of school impulsively, selfishly, and moving her to South Carolina from Pennsylvania, when she was 13 years old. And you guys know that that's tough, right? To start all over. And then what made it worse was my workaholism and my refusal to acknowledge this and stare it in the eyes and just work all day, work all night, work all day, work all night. And I've done a lot of family therapy and family work around that with her to get through this. There's nothing wrong with me saying that I made a mistake. But it doesn't mean that I didn't have a close relationship. Do you follow what I'm saying? And it doesn't mean that I wasn't trying to do the right thing.
It doesn't mean that's why she used drugs.
And no, it doesn't mean any of that. It just means that none of us are perfect. I mean, kids do not come with a manual that I've been given anyway. If you guys have that manual, let me know. All right. I always like putting this up too. Is that a good one or what? Looks can be deceiving. What you see from people, what you see going on in any given family or any given situation, you're seeing what's called frontstage stuff. What we want to put on display for the rest of the world. So be careful if you fall into this idea of we're the only ones doing it wrong, or we could have done this better, or what if? or maybe the lost dreams of, she should be this or he should be that, all those things that you'll get caught up in if you're not careful. Understand that you don't know. I think someone said it over here. Everyone's dealing with something. I think that's what you said, right? And I do believe that. I believe that it's impossible for us to know in the majority of cases because that's just not how the world works. But if you had a chance to sit down with people, you'll find that there are burdens of many different varieties, okay? So be careful. All right, we talked about this. We usually know what to do. We may not know how to do it. So we'll talk tonight a little bit more about the rules of communication, but I don't think that I'm going to say anything to you that's earth-shattering in that regard. Okay, I'm going to give you a lot of stuff, and I want to tell you that I'm talking to you as what? As a person in long-term recovery, as a family member who has dealt with this in other family members on all kinds of sides of the equation, right? Like, basically, you name it. I've dealt with it in a parent. I've dealt with it, in a kid. I've dealt with it in brothers. Do you get where I'm coming from? I always say that if you went to my family reunion and you picked up a rock and closed your eyes and threw it, you would hit an alcoholic. It's true. Some of them would be in recovery. Some of them wouldn't. Some of them would be, over by the keg fighting and stuff like that. But, this has been all around me. So in addition to that, I want to talk to you tonight as a professional who's done this and been trained in family therapy and all that kind of good stuff. And I also want to talk to you from the perspective of a dad. Because does everyone here know I have 7 kids? So if anybody got to get this shit right, it's me. So, and I think, what's that? So that's a picture of my wife and I. When I was out there doing my thing, we split up for a little while. So we had 3 kids when I was in active addiction. My son Nathan was 9, Megan would have been 7, and Elizabeth was 3. Okay, and you know how it goes whenever you're dealing with a relationship and alcohol and drugs are involved. We split up for a while. We're not necessarily reproducing. Okay, everyone grows up. That's Nathan. That's Megan. That's Elizabeth, but then bam, all of a sudden we get back together and we make up for lost time. So this is the crew. First of all, this is Isaac right here. He's now 11. You can't see everyone, but there's Ellie. She is 7. Andrew is 9. And Aiden, who you guys have heard a lot about because I just went through that crisis with him, is 5. And I do more things wrong than I do right. And I did more things wrong than I did right with my kids that are, I always say, off the payroll. My house is like a rehab. Once you kind of hit 18, I need the bed. Get out. We got somebody coming in. So, I definitely make mistakes. Every day make a mistake. In all kinds of different directions, overreact, underreact. But I can tell you right now, it's not because I don't have a relationship. And I would resent the heck out of anybody implying that. Even though we've had some bumps in the road with my family, I would resent the heck out of that. So that's the context for what we're going to talk about tonight. All right, now before we get there, let's talk about, and let's make sure we are kind of all on the same page. Remember, we've gone through this before. There are a lot of people who abuse drugs and abuse alcohol. A lot. Like some estimates are as high as about 36% of Americans are using at what's called a risky level. And we know that you can get in a serious jam even if you're using at a risky level. Risky is defined differently by different people, but use your imagination in that area. It has to do with the amount. It has to do with the behavior when the person's using. But there's still a part of them that can kind of take it or leave it. Even though they're out of control, there is still a part of them that can take it or leave it. I remember, college, that's how it was. There were dudes that were just like over the top, man. But like when they were done, they were done. When I was done, what was I doing? I was thinking about and scheming for the next time I was going to be able to do this. So we're going to talk about both groups, but first I want to start with this group, the group that becomes addicted, the group that kind of crosses the line. I'm assuming that most of you folks in here, that's kind of how you define what you're dealing with. It may not be. I may have that wrong, and raise your hand and ask questions. But this group has typically been parents parents and spouses who kind of look at the situation and say, this is out of control. This is something other than just a good time. Am I getting that right?
Yes.
Okay. This is as close as you can get to an x-ray where addiction is concerned. It's through this thing called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And what they do is they have a person come in and he sits down with a psychologist or a clinician or a doctor, and they go through their history and they try to establish a pattern of behavior. And if you meet 6 or more of these criteria in any 12-month period, you technically meet the criteria for what's called substance use disorder severe. The word addiction, interestingly, does not appear in the medical literature. So addiction is more like a term that we use. It's substance use disorder severe. Used to be called dependency. How many we talked about this? You remember the term dependency. So some of these whether or not your loved one's dealing with it. Tolerance is one that almost everybody's dealing with. They've been going at this for a while. The tolerance is probably kicking in. It takes more and more of the substance to get the same effect. You probably can check that box. Withdrawal is when I don't have the substance in my system, I get sick, and when I put the substance in my system, the sickness goes away. You probably can use your own judgment. You can probably judge that on whether or not that's there. Craving is an internal process you wouldn't know. People in here have had cravings for other things, but this is it's like a craving on steroids. It never leaves your mind. And this is something we can talk about for a minute, because as you go through this and you go through some of that stuff and you suffer some of that guilt as a parent, all the should-haves. Should have done this, should have saw this, should have said that, should have done this. Understand that if you're dealing with this phenomenon of craving, that all your consequences, I think this is really important to understand. All your consequences, all your disciplinary actions, all your noticing it wouldn't make a difference. Because you are so obsessed to get a hold of this stuff, to relieve that obsession, that you're going to go do what you got to do anyway. This is where it gets real contentious in my mind, when people start to throw those judgments around. They should have done this. If that was my kid, I would do that. You don't understand. It's something else is going on. Something else is going on. Man, I grew up back in the day whenever parents were not only were they allowed to beat you, they were supposed to beat you. It was like outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it was like a city ordinance. Not only would your parents beat you, everybody in the neighborhood would. I had consequences, man. I suffered consequences. I knew what was going to go down. I believe I crossed that line at a relatively early age. I look back on my situation, and for whatever reason, and I'll talk a little bit about what the risk factors are, I just approached substances different than other people. It was this stuff. You follow what I'm saying? It was, and so there was nothing my mom was going to do to punish me out of it.
Are a lot of them the strong-willed child, so to speak?
I think it takes on all different shapes and forms. Her question is, what about a strong-willed child? I think a strong-willed child in general is harder to get them to follow rules and expectations. There's different ideas around that. Some people say a strong-willed child can actually say no better than a person who's kind of passive and sort of more of an introvert, that kind of thing. I don't know that's ever been completely worked out. I think there are personality types, though, that lend itself a little bit more to taking the initial drink or taking the initial chance. If you're impulsive, if you're hyperactive, if you're just reckless, then you're probably more likely to jump in there. Inability to cut down, you would know that. They try to quit and they can't. They try to quit and they can't. They try to quit and they can't. Inability to control, they can't stick to their own expectations on any given evening. I'm going to go out tonight. I'm going to have a couple drinks. I wind up drinking all night. I come in on Sunday, that kind of thing. Physical danger, you're using in situations where you could get hurt. Drinking and driving is a really good example of that if you repetitively do it over and over again. You spend a great deal of time doing it. It's a full-time job. You have work and school problems. Social activities revolve around substances, and people are mad at you about it. And if you meet 6 of those criteria, then you fall into this other thing, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. You guys can't necessarily 100% figure that out. When we have anybody who's in a situation, this is just how it works, guys. It's how it works at Favor. And the truth is, if you went to any treatment center and you talked to them, they would tell you this how it works at their treatment center too. If you have a person who's in any doubt, what do? you're going to err on the side of caution. Do you get that? So if we're talking to somebody and we're kind of discussing what's going on, you know, I'm going to say, like, look, let's do this thing the right way. You get where I'm coming from? I'm probably not going to say, hey, you know, you don't meet this criteria. We're going to err on the side of caution. That's why there probably are people who haven't gone there that are in traditional settings. And as an industry, we're trying to figure that out. We're trying to figure out how do we. One of the greatest things that could go on was if there was actually like a definitive diagnosis, like I don't know what it would be, a blood test or a swab or something, because it is really hard for a person who hasn't crossed the line to really kind of give up and dedicate themselves to all the things you have to do for recovery. Do you guys get that? Like, one of the things that's really hard, or I'll speak for myself at this point, is I went through a bunch of stuff by the time I jumped into this thing. I was 31 years old. I looked at what they were saying when they were saying, like, all these substances have caused you problems. I had a history of a bunch of different stuff. I was able to say, like, yeah, I get that. I can't imagine what it would be like to try to be 20 years old and do that, or 19 years old. I just don't know what that would be like. You would have never got me in the room to even have that conversation then. This is something that we're struggling with and we got to get figured out as we move forward. And the reason this is going to get more intense, guys, is because the substances that are being used are so dangerous. You're going to see more and more kids kind of get involved in this process because, for good reason, parents are going to react to that stuff. It's just a different world, man, different world. Any questions about this criteria? Now, do not go home tonight and have, you know, Johnny sit down and say, Johnny, can we talk for a minute? I'd like to do a clinical assessment on you and establish whether or not you meet the DSM-5 criteria for substance use disorder. Let's begin. Don't do that. But just know that that's kind of like the ballpark part of it. And there are a lot of these that you can click off. If you're here, this one gets clicked off. Interpersonal issues, right? I'm sure tolerance is there. You've probably seen your loved one try to quit. You get where I'm coming from? You could probably start to figure this out a little bit as you go forward. And remembering, this takes on a lot of different forms for people too, right? I mean, this doesn't mean that you're living behind a dumpster. It could mean you're living behind a dumpster, but it doesn't mean you're living behind it. A lot of people do this, and they are functioning in society. That's another problem we have. We have this idea that we can look at somebody and tell. And also, here's another interesting thing. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the amount of any substance that they're doing. You get where I'm coming from? Like alcohol especially. You'll get into people who will start talking, and the first thing they'll say is how much the person drinks. And if you look up here, it doesn't say anything about the amount. It has to do with what happens when the person's drinking. So what happens is anytime you do anything pleasurable, dopamine is released. The neurotransmitter dopamine. Remember, there aren't chemicals in our brain. It's actually electrical impulses between brain cells. So dopamine is released. You eat food when you're hungry, dopamine is released. You drink water when you're thirsty, dopamine is released. That is a good thing. It tells you do that again. Now, where substances are concerned, you get high and you get drunk because what? An extraordinary amount of dopamine is released. And if you do that over and over and over again, the brain will overcompensate by shutting off the production of dopamine. Dopamine allows any of us to feel contentment. It allows us to feel normal. If there was some kind of weird magical way I could pull the dopamine out of your brain, you would spend the rest of your life completely discontent. You guys get that? It's literally the neurotransmitter that allows us to feel contentment. And this is an image of that process. So what you have on my right is chronic alcohol use or any substance. That is the shutting off of the production of dopamine. So this is why the person isn't going to respond to consequences. Let me take that back. This is why the person isn't going to respond to normal consequences. Life, the way other people respond. Now, I believe you can set people up for things like interventions, and you can do things where you can structure environment, you can start to set boundaries. But in terms of like, hey, I'm not going to give you, the keys to the car if you continue to do this, that means nothing to this person. Because they're trying to escape this horrible feeling right here. So think about walking around all the time in this sort of strange, desperate state of mind that you just feel like crap. Now throw in if it's opioids, you're also sick. You're having cravings. You got to get a hold of something to feel right. You got to get a hold of something to feel right. You've been doing this stuff for a while now, so what are you going to do? You're going to naturally go get the alcohol. You're going to naturally go get cocaine, whatever it is, and you're going to try to pour it into an empty bucket. And you're going to use, and you're not going to get the response you want. You're literally not even going to get up to what's called baseline. You're not even going to get normal. That's what we think of when we think of like addiction. Now again, we can't sit here and say every single person that you guys care about is in that space, but can you see how that's harder to manage than just knock it off? And I really, if you have any questions about this, ask about this, because this is something that you need to get in touch with as you deal with this going forward. We know that this is a process, right? Recovery is a process. And recovery for you is a process. So you kind of got to be clear about this, because you're going to run into situations, man. You're going to run into circumstances. You're going to be scratching your head. Yes, Carol?
The thing for me sometimes, with helping parents and for myself, when my daughter was using, because I know this, and that I know that her brain is such that she just has to have it to feel okay, or did at that time. I felt guilty that I was angry at her, because she really couldn't, I mean, this was a brain thing at that point. And she
Right.
was just trying to feel okay.
Right. So you get it? Absolutely. It does sound, and it's a lot of times in here I'll say I'm not trying to make an excuse for anyone. And that is one of the difficult things that we deal with. So if you think about this, her experience as a person going through this, okay, is independent of you. It's happening. It's happening regardless, kind of like what you're saying. Your experience as a mom is just as valid as hers. Do you guys get that? So it's not as if you can love your child and have compassion for your child, but still be angry as hell at them. I mean, it happens every day with little kids, right? My son did the whole, I think I talked to you guys about, he has this fantastic move that he does when he wants me to buy these Lego watches. All right? Have I talked you through one of these moves? It's actually quite genius, his strategy. So what he does is he starts off with just a straight plea. Okay? Just a straight up, like, here's the Emmett watch from the Lego Movie 2. Dad, I gotta have this. You know, that kind of thing. Reasons. I say no. He follows me around. This was at Barnes & Noble. The whole time he's saying, I gotta have this, I gotta have this, I gotta have this. I say no, no, no. Clearly his strategy changes because he stops asking. And I didn't know it, but what he moves to is, I'm gonna wait till we're checking out and I'm gonna put it up there. Okay? So this is his strategy at this point. So we're going through, and we get up there, and he does that. We go out, and he slams it up there on the table, and he says that, and you know how the cashier says anything else? He goes, boom. And then I say, we're not getting that, and he throws a fit, all that kind of stuff, and it's a scene with the cashier, right? Now, that is not okay for him to do that, okay? And I can tell him that's not okay for him to do that, and I can get mad as hell at him for that. But really, he's just a kid being a kid. His brain has some stuff going on too. But the two things aren't mutually exclusive. Do you get that? That's how you want to think of this. And then here's the rest of that story though. So I say no, and the cashier gives me this look like, what kind of dad are you, man? It's just an Emmett watch. So I start to walk out, and we're walking out. He's with my son, Isaac, who's 11, and I hear him say, well, that was an epic fail. Which was so funny. I don't know why. It was like coming from a 5-year-old. I think that's pretty funny. But you can be angry over a behavior. Do you follow what I'm saying? That you can chalk up to just where they're at developmentally or what they're dealing with in terms of something like this. You can absolutely, as a matter of fact, you don't want to deny your feelings. If you start denying your feelings, guys, it becomes a pattern, and that is classic codependency, which is what? You're up when the person's up. You're down when the person's down. If you start to, that's how that happens. You deny your feelings. Do you guys get that? This isn't about denying your feelings. We've talked about this in here. This is so you can be strategic on how you approach the person. It's also so that you don't feel like you don't bang on yourself as a parent when you read an article that basically says, hey, if you'd have done a better job, you wouldn't be in this boat. Do you guys get that? There's something else going on here. Something else going on. What other questions about the brain or any other anything else we can talk about? Yes, sir.
Is there a study or slides of like 30 days in a row?
Of coming back after this?
Correct.
Yes, there are. There are. It's done, for whatever reason, it's been done mostly with methamphetamine addiction. I don't know why. I think because they're trying to illustrate how long methamphetamine addiction takes to recover from. Methamphetamine addiction, in terms of like how long a person should be in treatment or how long a person should be in a recovery house, that should be the longest stay, because it takes about 18 months till this comes back. Okay, most of the time you'll see it happen much earlier than that. And there are a lot of things that you can do to make it better. The way you eat, whether you exercise, if you pray, if you go to meetings, if you go to a therapist. You follow what I'm saying? There are a lot of things you can do to make this happen quicker. We know for sure that in general, what we put in our body, for example, with food, directly impacts our brain. We know that exercise releases endorphins that make this happen. So you can get this to happen quicker. This is not a permanent condition, right? That's the good news. So no one can say exactly how long it takes. No one can tell you exactly how long it takes. Yes?
My daughter just finished her second stint of rehab, and as far as I know, she's been sober for 7 months. But there is no change in her behavior except for she's not drinking. Does that mean she's in recovery?
Yeah, she's in recovery. So nobody owns the word recovery. You know what I mean? Like, there is no czar of recovery. It says, like, this is what it looks like. You got to be doing. At Favor, we believe in multiple pathways to recovery. Any way you can get better. There could be all kinds of things going on with that situation. Now, we know for sure that no matter who the person is, they're better off if they're talking to a therapist, going to some meetings, getting around some healthy people.
She's supposedly doing all that. Now, she is bipolar 2 also.
So you also have issues like that you have to take into consideration. I will caution you on one other thing, though, and this, I have no idea, this doesn't necessarily apply to your situation. A lot of times, it's really interesting, this is 100% went down in my family. A lot of times, the person who has the drinking problem will put down the substance, and their family members will think that there's literally some kind of magical thing that's going to happen at that point. And I don't know how to say this. I was capable of being an asshole with or without alcohol. Do you guys get that? So be careful that you don't think that there's this destination that actually people have to learn how to act in the world, and bad behavior is not always attributable to substances. Do you guys? I feel like I'm not saying that right, but do you guys know? I mean, we all know people who never picked up a substance in their life that you just don't want to be in a room with them.
Well, especially with teenagers.
And then teenagers are a whole nother issue. We're starting some programming for teenagers, so let's talk positively about those teens, those adolescents. They're joyful, they're full of life, they can be molded. Maybe. So be careful. So what happened in my situation was exactly that. They thought that there was this like destination, that kind of thing. You have to remember, why does the person wind up going and getting help? It's probably because of this type of stuff. So technically, let's just use rehab for example. Technically, the rehab's job is to stabilize this. This is where it gets really weird for people. People put too much stock in that because they think that the rehab is literally going to like cure the person. And they're going to come home and they're going to live happily ever after in recovery, right? That's like thinking that's like having like a broken leg, going to the emergency room, getting the leg stabilized, and then thinking that the emergency room is responsible for the person running a marathon. You guys get? A rehab takes care of this. So these two they take care of through detox. Physical detox. 5 to 7 days. These they take care of over time by keeping the person safe, doing some counseling, getting them introduced to what? Groups. So they're starting to stabilize it, but you won't find very many, if you find a 30-day rehab that claims they will cure your child, do not send them to that rehab. You get that? That's a dangerous place to go. That's not even what their job is. Yes, sir.
We've got a 41-year-old that's in rehab now.
Okay.
And, of course, I think they're saying that it's a 30-day type deal with it.
But they're not saying that, they're saying starting out 30 days.
It starts with
It could be
stabilization.
longer, could be short,
Yep.
could be longer. And, you know, we're really wondering, you know, when he gets back, what do we do to deal with it?
It's a great
Because
question.
it's different with a 41-year-old than
It
it
is.
is with a teenager.
It is, and so, it is very different. So they're gonna take care of this. Where is he, by the way? If I-
He's, Mount Sinai.
Okay, so they're gonna take care of this and kind of get that stabilized. And then the other thing is, and you should be asking him about this, they're gonna have recommendations for him, okay? And, I'm of the opinion that if you're involved in his life, that you should be informed of this.
We are.
Okay, so they're gonna have, very specific recommendations. They should, you know, I haven't dealt with Mount Sinai, but when I was running rehabs and doing my thing, you would go through and then you would get with the family and say, here's what we recommend. We recommend the sober house. Here's a list of them in your area. Or we recommend, I don't know, some of the recommendations are things like intensive outpatient therapy. Sometimes the recommendations are engaging in like favor meetings and 12-step meetings, that kind of stuff. But what I would do is try to get that from them. And there's a couple different reasons. They're the ones who are actually seeing your son when it's a little bit stable. You get where I'm coming from? They're the ones who are most likely to be having a decent conversation with him. Would you guys agree it's very hard to talk to somebody when they're in the middle of this?
Yeah.
So this is very hard to talk to somebody. So they're talking to him after this is being stabilized.
So when he gets back, you know, I think we've talked to them about possibly him coming here.
Because
for-
they came here.
They came here and I think
Saw-
spoke
met
with
with
someone.
y'all.
And now I know what you're talking about. We referred them. I think,
Yes.
okay. So absolutely you do something like that. So what I would look at, and this is a great question. So if you look at like the rehab setting, why do people make the decisions that they do in any given circumstance? So for example, some people would be like, let's send him to a sober living house in Colorado, okay? Or other people would be like, let's just get him home so he can get back to his life and start working and he can go to favor meetings, he can go to AA meetings, that kind of thing. The factors that come into that are like how old the person is has something to do with it. What they got going on in their life before they went. How they do when they're there has a lot to do with it. You guys get that part? If you're real resistant to it, and let's say, for example, the counselors are like, I'm not sure where this person's head at, then they'll usually recommend longer stays. And that's where it's hard for me to sit here and say, do this or do that, because I haven't been with him as he's been stabilized. What I would say is try to get on that team with them and help follow that process. And then the second thing I would say for anybody in here, I mean, look, if you cut right to the chase, people get better if they do recovery-related things. Literally, like the statistics are phenomenally good for people who keep trying. Have you ever heard the phrase, keep coming back? For people who keep coming back, the ultimate results are around 75% will find long-term recovery. And that's pretty darn good for a chronic disease. Agreed?
Yes.
The problem is 9 out of 10 people quit coming back. Now we think we got to try to find ways to get them to come back, and we want to try to develop programs where we're, like I've said before, like, you know, kind of like we'll buy a black van and drive around and just kidnap people and keep them coming back. I don't know what it's going to take to keep people coming back, because those are pretty good odds. And if they're doing something, they're likely to start getting better. The problem is you're not going to get better when you're sitting on your couch, you know what I mean? Even if you're not drinking at that point, even if you're not using, when you're just sitting on your couch, kind of wasting away, maybe talking to your old buddies. Guys, that's just a matter of time, right?
Yes.
So get involved in a program like Favor. If they come here, they'll get exposed to a lot of other recovery-related options as well. They'll get. There's a lot of folks that do both like 12-step and Favor meetings. Favor has we have a lot of different type of meetings. And if Mount Sinai knows us, they're probably going to refer him back.
They are.
Okay.
They've already told us that.
Yes, ma'am.
How do you decide especially when they're at a facility away from you? Should they come back here, or should they stay there when they're
Yeah.
ready to be on their own, so to speak?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think she should come back here because she's got all these contacts here.
Yeah, and I happen to know you're talking about your daughter, and she's what, 19? Yeah, so you'll see a lot of times with younger people, it's harder to do this with a guy who's like older and married and has kids and has a job. It's harder to do this. But with younger people, it's kind of like go away and reinvent yourself and stay out there and do your thing.
I mean, I love her, but I don't know that I want her home.
Well, part of it
Because of
also,
that.
part of it also is, like, I couldn't do that when I went to rehab. You follow what I'm saying? Like I couldn't do that. I had 3 young kids. I had to get back to work. You know, if you can do it, do it. It's almost, if I had a conversation with your daughter, I would frame it up almost, you know how people kind of take a gap year, right? Like they go and they kind of do what they're going to do for a year. Like it's almost, what's your hurry? There's nothing back here that should be compelling you to run back here. Go, stay in Wilmington, stay at the launch pad, do your thing. It gets harder as the person gets older, in my opinion. A lot of those models get harder. What we know for sure is the number one indicator of residential success is length of stay. Okay, so this is just general information. There's not a lot that people know hands down and everybody agrees on when it comes to addiction recovery, but one of them is the longer a person is in a program, the better they tend to do. That's been driven down quite a bit by insurance companies, that kind of thing. We're starting different stuff here at Favor where we're trying to really, really encourage families to think about it in a long-term fashion. And think, not just families, but the individual, but if you're helping them out, think about it as a long-term investment. And again, I know not everyone's able to do it, but if you kind of like, can you spread out your money so that the person can go somewhere for a longer period of time? And we have a list of different programs that we think can do that type of stuff. But that sometimes they have to go to like a medical type facility to get this stuff taken care of. Do you guys get that? Like sometimes, I mean, especially when you start getting into withdrawal syndrome and stuff like that, you got to go somewhere and you got to get tightened up in that regard. Any other questions about the brain? Or anything else I can share about that? All right, so we talked last week about boundaries. We went through this. I'm not going to go over this again. I want to get down to like some of the different skills, that kind of stuff. Okay. All right, so when you start getting into, and again, you can apply this to, this isn't just with addiction. This is behavior change kind of 101. This is how you deal with employees at work. This is how you deal with if you're an authority figure and you deal with like volunteers. This is how you kind of like walk this thing out. The first thing you have to do, and this is easier said than done, is identify exactly what it is that you expect. A lot of times people will talk in really broad terms. You know, when you come back from rehab, you got to do the right thing. Or when you come back from rehab, you got to be doing your program. When you come back from rehab, you follow what I'm saying? And that's really, really hard to define and measure. So you have to, when you're thinking about like the expectations for your loved one or what you're okay with or what you're not okay with, if you could be as specific as possible. You cannot drink in my house. You know, if you're going to live with me and I'm paying for your college or whatever, you need to be attending AA meetings. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the more specific you can get. Now again, this presupposes that you have influence over the person. You may not have influence over the person. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple other things related to this, but this, again, let's pretend you have influence. So you want to, and I think that you want to start with 1, 2, 3 things. You don't want to have a list. You do not want to have like a contract that looks like the United States Constitution. You know, you will make your bed, you will be in by 10 o'clock, you will not watch any of that debauchery on TV, no more of this, no more of that. You're setting yourself up for what? All these battles that you don't necessarily need. So, and we call that mean what you say. Be very, very clear in your mind on what you're going to go after. So you got the financial stuff, you got the stuff you control. Remember, you also have emotional leverage. And this is where you can say things like, if you're drinking, I'm not taking your phone call on a Friday night. You know? Or if you're going to treat me mean, this is really important, Carol, and you were talking about your daughter too. If you're going to talk to me that way, I choose to not interact with you. And understand that that's a 100% appropriate response. You are saying how you want to be treated. But you got to be real specific about what she does that you don't like. Do you guys get that? Imagine how hard it is to say, when you talk to me like that, I'm not going to take your call. you leave it open-ended. Does she even know what that means? You follow? And it opens you up for arguments. So define what it is. When you start raising your voice, when you start swearing at me, when you call me up and you start demanding things, whatever your list is. So make sure you're real clear. You can't get too far with this conversation unless you know exactly what the battle is. Any questions about that part? How do you guys do that? Anybody feel like they've successfully done that?
I just, when she calls and starts swearing, I mean, I just said, I'm not gonna engage in
So,
this with you. I
yeah.
hang up.
So you address it in the moment, and if it became like too out of control, you could follow up with that and say like, you can make a phone call in between and say, look, I'm not going there. Just so you know, I think you do know because I hung up last Wednesday, but I'm not going there. The idea would be to kind of let the person know what the expectations are. What you'll find, a lot of people they'll literally like sit down with a pen and paper and start writing about this stuff.
For me,
What is
I
it?
had to have a list. This
Yeah.
is what I'm gonna say when she does X, Y, and Z.
And a lot of people will, it'll start off with something like, this is what I don't like about how you treat me. And you start, listing it, and then you say, here's what I'm willing to do in terms of that boundary. You guys get that? The big ones are always whether or not you can drink at the house, all that kind of stuff. Another one related to this that's interesting, and you'll get a lot of different opinions on this. There's a lot of people that will say, it's not your job to kind of like run their program, and I get that. It's not your job to run their program, but if you're in a relationship, okay, so here's what happened to me. I'm married. We got 3 young kids. I had a real good job. I was working in the healthcare system. I had probably a better job than I have now, technically in terms of like money, right? There's a lot riding on me getting it right. Do you guys get that? There's a lot riding on me getting it right for my family. So the people that I was working with, the therapists and stuff, brought my wife into the conversation and basically said, here's what he should be doing, and it's okay for you to know that. Okay? It's okay for you to know that, and you should set a boundary around whether or not he's following his program. And then she met my sponsor and all this other stuff. And why was that? Because it was kind of like unfair for me to say, like, I'm going to do my thing, and you just sit over here and worry. So her boundary was I had to be involved. Now, it wasn't hard for me to be involved. I was okay with it, but you get where I'm coming from?
I did say because of her age, I will always take you to a meeting, no matter where you are or what. Unless it's totally impossible.
Yep.
I will get you to a meeting if you want to go. And
Yep.
that was when she was still using.
So you're going to go through that process. We talked last week about how trauma impacts this. Unresolved trauma will throw you into a fear cycle as you start to try to. So you got like, here's what our target is, but the person goes out and doesn't come in on curfew, and you go into this fear cycle because it reminds you of an incident that occurred a year ago. That's very, very common, guys. It's trauma 101, that kind of thing. And then you'll back off of the situation. So you know what you want to say. Mean what you say. But the problem is you can't say what you mean. Because when the time comes, you're emotional. And what you want to say is, you have to come in on time. This is driving me crazy. I got to work tomorrow. Can we please get this right? We talked about this. That's what you want to say. But what comes out is, yo, what the F is going on? What the hell? I told you. Right? And emotional. And then you crank it up. And what happens when you crank it up? They crank it up. And then you crank it up. And then they crank it up. And then what happens? They storm out of the house. You spend the rest of the night frantically texting them. Where are you? What are you doing? Where are you? What are you doing? They spend the rest of the night, trying to deal with this, maybe drinking, maybe using. The whole thing blows up. So this is mean what you say what you mean. Say what you mean may be the hardest part. Because how do you take your emotions out of it? Remember we went through this thing last week? We're not going to go through it again now. I'll go over these again in the future, guys. But this is just a process that gets in the way. And it's all about trauma. All right? So, you're about to talk to the person. Slow yourself down. Whatever your skills are, if you do it in other parts of your life, like if you're good at business and you're able to negotiate situations calmly, bring it to the play here. You know, if you're in your own recovery program and you have skills that you can bring into the conversation, somehow you got to pull yourself out of that emotional cycle. If you believe that it's a brain issue, they are by definition really not going to be able to do that. You have to kind of be the sane one in this situation. But we've all been insane when we've dealt with these things, right? And how many people have said things, just ridiculous things? I mean, the things that I've said to my kids along the way, like dealing with this. Like, I remember we lived in Pittsburgh, and my 26-year-old, he was like, I don't know, 18. He's at the University of Pittsburgh going berserk. And I'm like, I know every cop in the city, man. I know the commissioner. Every frat's going to get shut down. Okay. Right? Because I was just driven by, and I think the main emotion or the main thing you're dealing with is what? Fear. Fear, and you're just terrified. So calm yourself down, and then these are just some of the things we talked about earlier around communication, just some basic stuff. The first thing is, try to get into a routine. If you got somebody in your life and you're having contact with them and they're trying to do a recovery program or you're trying to help them through this, it's better to talk about this on an ongoing basis rather than only in the middle of a crisis. If you talk about it only in the middle of the crisis, it's harder to talk about. It's not routine. It's a bigger deal. Mom's only coming to me because she thinks let's talk about this on a regular basis. If you guys just all of a sudden call up your loved one and say, can we get together tomorrow and talk? What are they going to think? They're going to think, oh, they think something's up. They're going to get defensive. So it's better to talk about it on a regular basis. It's not about winning anything. Very important. This isn't about any of us getting our way. It's about, can you move the needle on recovery? Can you kind of help nudge them in the right direction? We talked about the target. This is an interesting one because people who tell you tough love wouldn't tell you this, okay? I'm not a believer in the term tough love. I believe in the appropriate expression of love. We've talked about this in here before. To appropriately express love to another person involves setting boundaries. If my 5-year-old wants to drive the car tonight, the loving thing to do is to say no. Do you guys get that? It's nothing to do with tough. You don't have to do it tough. You don't have to do it mean. You also are allowed to compromise. You're allowed to, the deal was I wanted you to go to rehab, and but you're not there, but you're willing to engage in 12-step meetings. You're willing to go to favor. You're allowed to, you have the discretion to do that. Because here's what we know. Of all the people, there are 23 million people in America, and only 13% went through rehab. Okay? Now, what does that tell you? That people can also find it other ways, right? Outpatient therapy, 12-step meetings. Everybody, I know when you talk to people in recovery, I know more people who didn't go to rehab than did. Now, remember that when you talk about rehab, we're talking about that inpatient kind of model. That doesn't mean they didn't do recovery houses. Be careful of who you're getting your support from, right? Try to be kind. It's very difficult. Don't be kind at your own expense, though. If you're in here and you're exhausted and the person has just beat you up mentally, certainly physically, if anybody ever laid hands on you, if people are threatening you, if people are stealing your property, you do not need to be kind. Do you get that? Your best bet is to set boundaries along the lines of, I just can't be around you, you're not safe. But if that's not going on, you have an opportunity to be kind in the middle of this storm. And you're not going to want to be kind. And you don't have to be kind when they're being mean to you, Carol. But it's interesting. One of the things, remember, I told you I would give you the playbook for people who are in addiction. I told you I'll pull the curtain back so you guys can get some of the secrets. One of the things we love to do, that I believe, is we like to fight. We like to argue. We love chaos. When you're in active addiction, you love chaos. Why? It creates cover for your behavior. You can always talk about other things. We can argue about what I did last Wednesday. In the meantime, I'm up here stealing your prescriptions right now. All this other stuff, because the chaos takes the eye off the ball. And if you're able to rise above that, it's interesting how people respond. one of the exercises we'll do, I don't do a lot of family therapy as much as I used to before I started this job, but one of the exercises we would do in family therapy is try to identify the person who has the most contentious relationship and give them an assignment where they have to say 3 nice things to their loved one every day, to the addicted person. And the responses are funny. They're actually funny. Like the person will be like, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean that's a nice shirt? What are you talking about, Mom? Like what's going on is you're breaking a pattern of conflict. You're getting out of this pattern and this predictable kind of like, you're going to get mad, I'm going to get mad, that kind of thing. Be kind. When you're talking to anybody, anytime, anywhere, put away your phone. I know that's a basic thing to say, but it's not going to work. I was just looking for my phone. I do it every week. It's not going to work if you're trying to set boundaries while you're texting somebody. How about tone of voice and body language? There's what you say and then there's how you say it. Try to avoid blaming the person. Again, counterintuitive, but doesn't really move the needle. Listen to learn, not listen to respond. What does that mean? A lot of times when we're listening to somebody, especially when we have a strong opinion, when we feel wronged, while they're talking, we're not actually listening. What are we doing? We're formulating our response. So, you're telling me this, and I think it's a bunch of BS, and I'm already in my mind figuring out what I'm going to say to you to make you think that it's a bunch of BS, right? And then when I start talking, you start formulating, so there's no actual exchange of information at any point. Elicit outside support if needed. This would be like a counselor or a sponsor or a therapist. And always try to close these meetings or these conversations with your loved one with the next step. For me, it's always, we're going to do this again next week. I do this, I go to dinner all the time with my daughter. My daughter's doing great now, but we go out to dinner. We go out to lunch, every week. And we just check in. And God forbid it hit the fan, I would hopefully have that routine that I could tap into. But it's going to be another meeting the next week and another meeting the next week. And you got to figure out where you go from here with that. Any questions about communication or anything that I missed? Basic stuff, right?
I have a little question.
Yes, ma'am.
My son, when we're having these conversations, my son will say, well, I have a degree in psychology
wow.
at the University of South Carolina, and
Wow.
he
Okay.
knows everything.
Yep.
So
Yeah. So you tell him that I have a degree in psychology from Indiana University, and a psychologist or drug addict's just like everyone else. No, don't say that. That would be contentious.
No, I can't.
So it could be that. So her statement was her son leans on this I'm a counselor kind of thing. I'm a psychologist kind of deal. It could be that. Oh, it could be. You don't even have to have a degree to think that you know, right? I'll tell you where you'll also run into trouble is if you run into somebody who's been in recovery before. This is where they'll use that to their defense. And it'll be things like what? You don't know about this, I do. Or maybe they don't even need to be in recovery and they can say that. What do you guys, anybody have any suggestions on how to respond to that? All right, so this is, if you can, there are some things that you can do to kind of diffuse. So if you can avoid any kind of debate and focus on what you're going to do and what your feelings are regarding the situation. Do you get that? Where he can get you is if you're trying to convince him that he has a problem. Or where he can get you is if you're trying to convince that this isn't normal. Because that's when he can say that stuff. But if you say things like, I can't sleep at night because of what's going on.
Okay.
Do you follow what I'm saying? I haven't really been able to sleep for 3 weeks since you started this. He can't look at you and say, you don't feel that way. Do you follow me? But he can look at you and say, you're overreacting, Mom.
Oh, yeah.
And I happen to know because here's the criteria.
That's a mom's job.
Well, you really want to, I think the overarching point is try to avoid winning that debate and trying to get them to convince. The more you talk about yourself and the more you talk about how it impacts you, the less they can argue with that. I did an intervention once. I shared it here before. So what was going down was this guy was trying not to drink, and one thing led to another, and he wasn't following the expectations or the deal. And this has been a very kind of laid out intervention. And the way we do interventions, there's ongoing meetings. We call them follow-ups. And so at this follow-up, his wife was like, you drank last Wednesday, okay? And he's going off, I didn't drink, you think you know more than me? I've been in recovery, you think you know? And we're going on, and it's escalating. And I don't know how it comes out, but all of a sudden he says, and then last Tuesday when I was drinking. And I went, you said you didn't drink. And he's like, I didn't drink Wednesday.
That's right.
So, well, I mean, that's a very extreme example of this idea of like splitting hairs and arguing. I'm telling you, like this deal.
They remember in this.
Well, and I'm not sure I completely understand the psychology of the person in active addiction, how they want to argue. And you'll even hear people talk about, like, even if the family member walks away, the person, has that ever happened to you, where you were trying to disengage from the argument? And and I think that's just a comfort zone for us when we're in active addiction. You know, we're in turmoil ourselves. Our mind is chaos, so let's just all live in chaos. And let's argue about whether or not I drank on Tuesday or Wednesday. And let's argue about whether or not I actually meet the criteria for addiction. You know? And then what you can do is try to pull yourself out of that and talk about yourself. You were going to say something,
I
ma'am?
was going to say that's exactly what my son did. My adult son, he could move in with me as long as he agreed not to use drugs in the house. Well, he used them in the garage.
Oh, wow. Hey, man.
In his
Come on, contract's a contract. Yep.
In his mind, he wasn't using drugs
Yeah.
in the house, and therefore I shouldn't be upset.
Yes.
Because it was in the garage. And
Yes.
that's a perfect example of what you just said.
So I think, yes, Jerry.
Back to what her son, who is a psychologist, I use this in business, but it works with this too. Often I'm involved with someone and I ask them a question, but they know a lot more about it than I do. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah.
Maybe they got a better degree in it.
Yeah.
But with the right sequence of questions, asking their input,
Yeah.
you can literally get them to go
Paint themselves in the corner.
where you want them to go.
Yeah. So if you said something like, well, what if, is there any such thing as addiction then? Does it even exist? And he says, yes, of course it does, Mom. And we'll tell, what does that look like? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And get the person talking, and sometimes they'll talk themselves right into a corner.
person.
Yeah. They'll talk themselves right into a corner where you'll be able to say, well, isn't that what happened to you? You know, that kind of thing. Now that's hard to do because the only thing that gets in the way with that is you got to make sure you keep your head. Because remember, again, it's going to get emotional. But what you don't want to do is enter into that great debate, that unwinnable. You guys know what I'm talking about, circular conversation. That if you let it go, you literally would be there for the rest of your life.
You can make them feel so proud that they can give
They
you
came to their own conclusion. That's right.
They're giving you their information. It's much better for someone to come to a conclusion in their own head.
That's right.
than to put it in their head.
That's right. But and then again, the other thing would be try to avoid that noise that goes on and all that, like again, that chaos and that conflict that people just thrive in when they're in the middle of this. Now the whole denial thing in terms of like denying the behavior, okay, or minimizing the behavior. People will say that that's just a mechanism that the person's engaging in. So when he's saying to you, I didn't use in the garage, it's just a way of him coping with it and trying to minimize his own addiction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It could be that. It could also be what? He's literally thinking he's going to talk you into this. Either way, you're not dealing with a rational person.
No,
Yeah,
I realize that.
You're not dealing with a rational person. If you think about that, I mean, if you don't think it's a brain disease, listen to that, right? Because that's just not what a normal person says.
Right.
That's not what you say when you are of sound mind. No, Mom, I was smoking in the garage, and it's technically not the house, okay? Because here's the city ordinances, and it defines that this is a separate building and that kind of thing. Wow, man, that's a good one. And then if you're in doubt, when in doubt, step back and think of every boundary as a no. Okay? No is a complete sentence. It'll come up in different ways. I won't lend you $1,000. I won't let you destroy my house. I won't let you treat, because remember, you're getting into this situation, you're getting worked up, you're getting frustrated, and you can't think clearly. So this is what you kind of like lean back on. What other questions about this part of the process? What other questions about dealing with boundaries dealing with setting limits. So our take at Favor Greenville would be that this is the most important part of the conversation. Well, there's two equally important parts. One is, how do I do this? Okay, how do I set boundaries? How do I say no? It takes practice. And then the second thing would be, how do I deal with the stress, the anxiety, and the worry around this? How do I not get destroyed while I'm doing this? But if you learn how to do this, and you work on this, even if you pick any one little thing that you're going to work on, and you get good at this, this will change the game for you. This will change the game for you more than anything because, again, remember, this is a process. This is something that you might have to do a couple times. It's just the way it is. You might have to like redirect the person or deal with this issue after a period of time with the person being in recovery. And that's okay. You can get them back on track, or you can protect yourself through these boundaries. So any other questions about that? And then I'm going to finish up with a little bit of positive psychology. Yes?
Just one thing, kind of a comment, if you would address, I can remember the fear of if I didn't give in to the request or withdrew, that then they might go further and it could be like a worse outcome.
Yes.
You talked about that before and getting in your mind to that place where I think you said you're not going to cause them to do a certain thing, but man, I just couldn't let go of that.
No, and I think that's a really common theme, and if you talk to a lot of people, her comment was, what do you do when it comes to setting boundaries, and you have this scenario in the back of your mind that if I go ahead and say no, he can't come home, or if I go ahead and say no, I'm not going to continue. And it's cold, that's going to escalate things, and that's also going to escalate use. What I would tell you is that most people go through a process where they've kind of like tried to compromise before. Like, there aren't a lot of people who go 0 to 60 with that type of boundary. You guys get that? Basically, it's based on their own experience that they've tried it other ways beforehand. This is very important. You kind of like say to yourself, well, we've tried it that way. I've tried to protect him from himself here in the house. And then the thing that is so important, and it's destroying you. This is the deal. Like, you cannot help anybody. If you're going down, I mean, we've talked about this, and what are the diseases that are connected to chronic stress, guys? I mean, you name one, it's connected to chronic stress. Cancer, heart disease, anxiety, strokes, depression, all of the above. You aren't going to be able to help the person if you're laid out in bed all day. And the only way that you can kind of like make sure you don't have that happen is by working on boundaries. Now, just like the person who's trying to like not use, if you screw up, you don't beat yourself up and say, well, I'll let him back in the door or whatever. You try again. And you're always allowed to adjust. But the idea is that you continue to work on that skill set. You continue to work on it. Yes, sir?
This may seem like it's out of the blue, but I think in the area of saying no, she's asking us for a lot of money for these strange things, fantastic stories. We say no. She argues. What are your feelings on over-the-counter drug tests? Do they work?
It's well, I mean, so over-the-counter drug tests do work. Okay, people get over on drug tests in a lot of different ways. They'll get urine. They'll kind of like have somebody else's urine that'll test clean and that kind of stuff. The thing about over-the-counter drug tests or any drug test is you have to be prepared to act on whatever the results are. That kind of thing. Unless it's just I just want to monitor and know what's going on. But they do work, absolutely. And you can order, you can actually like go on Amazon and order like a big batch for a bulk price, that kind of deal. You hear people have different experiences with drug testing, very different experiences. For some families, you'll find that it's like actually like more trouble than it's worth, because it's sort of confirming what they already know, and really you're just in this perpetual argument about the person saying, no, I'm not going to take it, I'm not going to take it. We do a training on, we haven't done it in a really long time. Actually, I can't remember the last time we did it, but we have like a parent, like how to do a drug test training, to tell you the truth. And one of the tenets or one of the principles is if they say no, it's a positive drug test. So there's never been a person in the history of the world who's been clean and somebody said, can you please pee in this cup? And they have said anything other than, yes, give it to me. Okay? There is no, I got to drink some water and wait. Like that doesn't happen if you're going to pass a test. if you actually went through this and you're going to test clean, you want to pee in every cup in the county, okay? So a refusal is a no. But you got to be real clear. Here's the other thing. You're probably right about your feelings about these situations. Your intuition is probably correct.
But that's also the hardest thing to face. sometimes.
It is the hardest thing to face, and I'm not saying that you go home and you confront the person based on your intuition, but I mean, I've never done a study on it, but I guarantee, man, I could line the loved one up, I could line the family up over there, and say we're gonna do a little experiment. I ask a couple questions, look at people's body language, get the family to ask them a couple questions, and then have you say, do you think they're clean or dirty, and then or clean or using, and you say use, and you get it right almost 100% of the time. People say, I can tell by the way he smiles. Okay? There's like I used to say my wife should work for like the NSA. Like as one of those people who can kind of like read people's like body signals and stuff like that and recognize it. That's so you don't have to like drug test. You can drug test to confirm, but what are you going to do if that happens and it comes back yes? And how can you influence it in the meantime would be where I would go with it. Yeah. We are going to roll out, so we've trained about 11 interventionists, and we're trying to figure out how do we get this going from a financial perspective because interventionists, these guys will be paid. This is a very high kind of like level, it's a high staff intensity kind of thing, okay? Where we hope to be able to help with situations where you have somebody actively using and you're worried, and they need to get to a recovery house, or they need to get to a treatment center or whatever. We know that that's a glaring need, and it's going to become more and more of a need as we move forward. That's where, if you thought that was going on, something like that may be useful. And we'll talk maybe next week about that a little bit more.
Can you answer her question?
I have a question.
Yes.
And I realize I'm an enabler.
Well, that's okay. We all are.
Well, when your child calls you and says, Mother, we've been kicked out of our apartment, and I have 2 dogs and all this suitcase. What am I supposed to do? So I give him money so he can move back into his apartment.
Yeah, we would recommend you work on that. Okay, guys.
Don't pay the rent. Don't give it to him.
So for all kinds of different reasons, that's going to create obviously a cycle, and we're not labeling anything, and we don't judge anyone. I don't know what I would do in a situation like that. You get it? And you could do other things where you could say we'll drop you off at the shelter or whatever. But yeah, part of it is you got to start saying no to some of that. Yeah. You don't have to reject the situation altogether. You can try to help where you can.
I think the hardest thing is where it's happening, and found out that most places that you want to try to get help, it takes money to do that.
Yes.
There's really not many free places you can go where we know about that you can get help.
But there are a lot of places that are less expensive than others. And our goal is to try to start sharing this information a little bit more up front, okay? You're absolutely right, though, there aren't. And that's why you have to, that's why we believe you guys kind of have to almost become subject matter experts yourself. Because
they lock them, they put them in jail. I mean, what good is that to put them in jail?
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, you're not going to get better sitting in a jail cell. And a lot of these folks I believe you could turn jails into treatment facilities relatively easy. I actually do. Like if you look at the numbers, it's a policy issue, not actually a cost-effective issue. But that's an argument for another day. Yes.
Just to let you know, there's going to be, and it's February 28th from 6 to 8 at Greenville Tech, and it'll be in their auditorium, which is right there in that roundabout, A Dose of Reality.
Yeah, I'm speaking at that.
Okay.
Yep. So that's an event that has multiple people kind of talking about. It's a general kind of information session on substance use and options and things like that. Yes.
Really quick, do you have any plans to maybe respond to the article?
So I responded to the article today with a couple, with a car rant that's on my Facebook page, and then with another the car rant, I didn't really talk about that a lot, but the second one I did. So I responded to the article. I want to get them to write another article addressing stigma. And I'd like them to, go through us, and not just us, talk to whomever, and really, really put out there, almost like you want a retraction. I'll be honest with you, that was incredibly insensitive at the very least. I mean, the person, hasn't even grieved yet. And to be putting an article out there like that, we feel like we have to do something. We have an obligation. We are the advocacy organization in Greenville County. We have to say something. And I've said it already. You should check it out. And then if you guys say something to anyone you know or whatever, it was wrong. It was a straight up dead wrong article that just is not, it's not okay. You would not do that where other diseases are concerned. You would not do that where other marginalized groups are concerned. You would not get away with it. The world would be screaming from the rooftops. But you're allowed to do and say whatever you want to addicts and their families, because addicts are junkies. And they're just like lowlifes anyway, and their families are a bunch of enablers. And so, yes, ma'am.
I had not read the article.
Okay.
I didn't know about the article, but just today, I actually got into an argument with some people who had read this article, and this is what they were saying, and I immediately, just like you, I said, "What? Hold it. Having been through this twice, and I said, I've been there.
Yeah.
I have been there.
Yeah.
And this is not, you can't put this on the parents.
That is not what went down there. And here's the other thing. Remember, it's like I said earlier, it's a coping skill. It's literally like what you got going on is a bunch of scared people. And so what do? It's not us, because we communicate clearly and we talk about consequences, right? And we do family activities together. Look, man, Disney World isn't going to keep anybody from getting high. Yes?
That's a good question. Going back to the stigma and the shame that brings with the family when they're going there, we talked a lot about how the family were worried about what the Joneses are going to think next door. But as they're saying this in front of the loved one that's addicted, what type of effects do you think that has on the addicted for speaking about hope, living in shame?
Yeah.
Because I believe, personally, it creates a better hyper, it creates a better,
Yeah. It's just, it all feeds into what's been going on for the last, 50, 60 years. And it's not going to get talked about. And when it's not getting talked about, now the addicted person can do all the things that they do to perpetuate the addiction, which is what? Split the family, keep it quiet, keep it all indoors. I think those of us who are dealing with addiction or inactive addiction, we're ashamed and shamed on a whole lot of different levels. And so, we don't necessarily need an article to make us feel worse. But what it does is it reinforces what we already have going on. We're like, yep. And it's this weird kind of like us versus them thing that starts to go on. Have you ever noticed that? Where it's just sort of like, the addicted person and the parents are playing probation officer, and then society is like those people. It's all that covered. It starts to go on. Frank?
I was gonna say that with articles like that, stigma's gonna be there. That just doubles.
Yeah, it does. And so, we'll see what happens. We will see what happens and what goes on with it, and we'll pursue it again. We've actually contacted the reporter. Okay, and the thing about that is that I know the dude, and he's written some good articles. Okay, I believe at the end of the day, what you'll see is it's totally unaware. Do you get that? Like, totally unaware that would even be like, because we're so used as a society of talking like that. It's what you were just talking about, Karen. That's just how people roll, right? And it's just what they say, and nobody even thinks twice about it. Okay, so.
Well, the problem's never been greater.
The problem's never been greater. There's never been this much attention.
And people in Greenville County and everywhere you go, where everybody knows the problem is enormous, but it is under the carpet.
Yeah.
And so it is coming out, so now is really.
Yeah, and then the last thing I want to say about it is I get real concerned about families who literally will look at a situation like this and start to say that is them, okay? Because I would make an argument those are the families that are in most danger of it having it happen. Where they actually would look the other way. Do you follow what I'm saying? Because they've sort of set themselves up in this situation where we can't have this go on. And listen, man, this is a healthcare issue. This is a healthcare issue that should be screened for routinely. It is like anything else that we need to get help for. Some of us will, do better at getting better than other people. Some people will have a stronger manifestation of the disease than others. It's no different than any other chronic disease. If we can just get out of our own way for a minute and be okay with talking about this issue, then I think you start to see things change. There's a reason, guys, why only 10% of people with this issue show up. And it's not because they're all obnoxious monsters. Do you get it? It's because they're embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're afraid, they're terrified. So, and their families are too. But, well, good deal. We're going to end this thing, guys. We will be back here next Monday. We'll have a regular group. We'll do another lecture next week. If you guys have any requests or any suggestions, grab my card and email it to me. Otherwise, we'll probably just continue to, we'll finish up this. If we could close this thing with the serenity prayer. Get a moment of silence for those still suffering from this disease and the family members brought in this no choice of their own, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, guys, thank you very much. We got cards up here if you need anyone to talk to. These are 24-hour hotline. Take one with you.